Yeah. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Good job, bud. Hi, I'm Scott, and this is the 80 Thursdays Project. Don't laugh at Daddy, he makes himself conscious. Okay, be quiet. This is... Milo, shush. This is day 11 of the project. So, this is day 11 of the project. I am continuing on with animation this week, as tedious as that is, but it's actually really interesting as well. So, this week I learned about something called onion skinning. I'm probably getting the name wrong, but basically that is kind of like how in old animation, like in Disney and whatnot, they had like their transparent cell paper, or their sheets of transparent acetate, that's the word. They would draw one scene and then they would layer on the next one, and then they could draw the next frame of the parts that moved. And so yeah, it's kind of like that. So when I'm looking at it on the computer, I will draw one frame and then I will move on to the next frame, and the previous frame becomes semi-transparent, making it easier for me to animate. Otherwise it can look like a janky, wiggly mess, which sometimes looks good on animations and is a good look to go for, but it can, in this case, it's not going to work. So that's primarily what I've been focusing on. I've been using a new program called Adobe Animate CC 2019. That is basically just Photoshop for animation. So using my Photoshop skills from previous work, I can transfer them over. I still have a lot to learn, and I'm picking at it like I am with every program on this project, but I feel like I can get a good grasp on this. So there's not a whole lot to talk about. Animation is a slow process, a lot slower than a lot of people realize. I mean, there are 30 frames approximately in every second of film, and you have to animate every single one of those frames for a good fluid animation. If you want to go up to 60 frames per second, which is kind of like the gold standard for games, all the best games run at 60 frames per second, you have to animate 60 frames, which is a lot to animate. So I'm not doing that, I just can't. Yeah, 30 frames every single second, and that has to then loop and loop and loop and loop. That is something I'm working on. It's a lot of frames, a lot of work, but it's fun, it's interesting, and it's good. So something I've been thinking about for the animation is that because the tail of the character is constantly animating, as it moves, this might start to look really strange, especially because it will start repeating itself. And so something I've been thinking about doing is making each of the little pixels an individual sprite. So rather than the character being one sprite that is constantly animating, it is a bunch of sprites animating together and moving together. That way I can control the distances between them a bit more. I can play around with them. I can have more variation on their animation. This is just small things, but they will add to the overall level of polish, especially since the enemies and a lot of the other characters in this game are all going to follow this same principle in their design, with these little pixels moving. If I can get this to work in Game Maker, it would be great. Some of the problems with that might be that it uses too much memory, too much processing power, and might not work, especially if the screen gets busy and full of enemies. But all of this is going to have to be stuff I prototype. So once I have the animation looking good in Adobe Animate, I can then start transferring that over to Game Maker, seeing if I can get it to work. And if it works, great, bonus. I can start then looking at the jumping animations and all the different animations using this multi-sprite method. Something else I've been thinking about over the past few days is the sound design. And sound is something I am not got any experience in at all. And so I have been wondering how to start that process. I don't know whether I need to speak to somebody who does know, which is probably the right way to do it, to be perfectly honest, or if I need to start looking into that now. I think I want to go for a little bit more of a synthesized sound, which I think will work well to the game, rather than kind of a more organic, orchestral. I mean, obviously I'm not going to get an orchestra, but, you know, made through MIDI controllers. Sound. So I would say I'm gonna start looking at that over the next few weeks, but I don't have time. I'm gonna concentrate more on the animation for now, get that looking great and good, and then I can start implementing that into Game Maker, and then once that's good, I can start looking at getting some enemies and concentrating back on the mechanics. Because I'm conscious that I am going to start forgetting how to use Game Maker if I don't go back to it soon, being that I've had a couple weeks away from it. So yeah, I have been Scott. This is day 11 of the Game Maker 80 Thursdays project. See you next week. Right, I've got an audience this week. Live studio audience. Okay, you ready? I'm very self-conscious now that they're in front of me.